sense, an evolution from the unorganized, unauthorized warfare of the Tudor period. For there was a deal of piratical smack in the anti-Spanish ventures of Elizabethan days. Many of the adventurers of the Sir Francis Drake school, for instance, actually overstepped again and again the bounds of international law, entering into the realms of de facto piracy. Nevertheless, while their doings were not recognized officially by the government, the perpetrators were neither punished nor reprimanded for their excursions against Spanish commerce at home or in the West Indies. Rather were they commended, and it was considered not altogether a discreditable thing for men to get rich upon the spoils taken from Spanish galleons in times of nominal peace. Many of the most reputable citizens and merchants of London, when they felt that the Queen failed in her duty of pushing the fight against the great Catholic power, fitted out fleets upon their own account, and sent them to levy good Protestant war of a private nature upon the Pope's anointed. Some of the treasures captured in such ventures were immense, stupendous, unbelievable. For an example, one can hardly credit the truth of the purchase gained by Drake in the famous capture of the plate ship in the South Sea. One of the old buccaneer writers of a century later says, "The Spaniards affirm to this day that he took at that time 12 tons of plate and 16 bowls of coined money a man, his number being then 45 men in all, insomuch that they were forced to heave much of it overboard, because his ship could not carry it all." Maybe this was a very greatly exaggerated statement put by the author and his Spanish authorities. Nevertheless, there was enough truth in it to prove very conclusively to the bold minds of the age that tremendous profits, purchases they called them, were to be made from piracy. The Western world is filled with the names of daring mariners of those old days, who came flitting across the great trackless ocean in their little tub-like boats of a few 100 tons burden, partly to explore unknown seas, partly, largely, perhaps, in pursuit of Spanish treasure. Frobisher, Davis, Drake, and a score of others. In this left-handed war against Catholic Spain, many of the adventurers were, no doubt, stirred and incited by a grim, Calvinistic, puritanical zeal for Protestantism. But equally beyond doubt, the gold and silver and plate of the Scarlet Woman had much to do with the persistent energy with which these hardy mariners braved the mysterious, unknown terrors of the great unknown ocean that stretched away to the sunset, there in faraway waters to attack the huge, unwieldy, treasure-laden galleons that sailed up and down the Caribbean Sea and through the Bahama Channel. Of all the ghastly and terrible things, old-time religious war was the most ghastly and terrible. One can hardly credit nowadays the cold, callous cruelty of those times. Generally, death was the least penalty that capture entailed. When the Spaniards made prisoners of the English, the Inquisition took them in hand, and what that meant all the world knows. When the English captured a Spanish vessel, the prisoners were tortured, either for the sake of revenge or to compel them to disclose where treasure lay hidden. Cruelty begat cruelty, and it would be hard to say whether the Anglo-Saxon or the Latin showed himself to be the most proficient in torturing his victim. When Cosham, for instance, captured the Spanish ship in the Bay of Biscay, after all resistance was over and the heat of the battle had cooled, he ordered his crew to bind the captain and all of the crew and every Spaniard aboard, whether in arms or not, to sew them up in the mainsail and to fling them overboard. There were some 20 dead bodies in the sail when a few days later it was washed up on the shore. Of course, such acts were not likely to go unavenged, and many an innocent life was sacrificed to pay the debt of Cobham's cruelty. Nothing could be more piratical than all this. Nevertheless, as was said, it was winked at, condoned, if not sanctioned by the law, and it was not beneath people of family and respectability to take part in it. But by and by Protestantism and Catholicism began to be at somewhat less deadly enmity with each other. Religious wars were still far enough from being ended, but the scabbard of the sword was no longer flung away when the blade was drawn. And so followed a time of nominal peace, and a generation arose with whom it was no longer respectable and worthy, one might say a matter of duty, to fight a country with which one's own land was not at war.